drawing from what was beautiful and beneficial. Testimony to this today is located in a prominent place as one enters the small archaeological museum in the old Carnegie building on the back street, Kingstown. There sits one of the most important and beautiful archaeological finds in the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is referred to as the Bat Stand, a large, elaborately sculptured ceremonial artifact with the face of a bat that belongs to the indigenous people of St. Vincent. So exquisite is this artifact that some archaeologists suspect that it was probably only used by priests and only in religious ceremonies. Recent and ongoing archaeological research have been discovering the importance of the bat, male, and the frog, female, in the religion and mythology of the early indigenous Caribbean people. They are also discovering more and more that our early indigenous people were indeed very wise and well grounded in the natural environment around them, and that they highly valued creatures like the bat that control the insect pests on their crops and subsequently protected their very existence and their life. In conclusion, I would hope that this incident would help us to think a little more about the colonial honors and awards that our government continues to bestow upon our people. It is high time we learn to discern true beauty from ugliness. In this tiny country, we continue to destroy the land, the forests, and God's harmless creatures even before we know their benefits or their purpose. And someday soon, our great-grandchildren will be ashamed of us. I would also like to suggest in closing that just as the Garifuna Nation is a unique coming together of the Kalinago and African peoples and cultures, we too must learn to seek out and to bring together the wisdom of the indigenous people and the wisdom of Africa, where, for example, bats are credited with high intelligence, as well as being a symbol of death and rebirth, and are able to guide people through the dark nights of their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Padama. I don't know if we have time maybe for one or two questions, comments. Yes, Dr. Palacio.
Certainly, thank you very much for that very, very pleasant presentation. I'd like to make two comments. One is that the name is really Buliri. Sorry, Buliri. So the accent is on the U. The first U. Bu. Yeah, Buliri. Buliri. Yeah, not Buliri.
I'm trying to learn the Latin and to learn the Garifuna, which the Latin is a little complicated. Thank you.
I think the Latin is more complicated than the Garifuna. The other comment is that I was aware of all the information as well as the blog and the tremendous amount of reaction coming from the diaspora. I think that what lessons we have here are two. One is the powerfulness of the media, the electronic media these days, that across this continent, divide, etc. And that we can use that media for our own purposes. The other point that I would like to make is the need for the interrelationships with the diaspora. And that the diaspora also needs to be involved as much as possible in what is happening in the homeland. Yesterday there was a discussion about Balisau and what could be done to protect Balisau, given the nature of circumstances around it. And again, I can see the diaspora community raising that particular matter very, very strongly because it has emotional, spiritual, and psychological benefit to us in the diaspora, but also to people here. So I'd just like to make those comments.
Thank you. The Baliso issue is a tremendous dream, and it is so big that sometimes we think it impossible, but it is not impossible. The bigger the dream, the greater the dream is, the more that we can strive to secure what needs to be done. It is not impossible.
We have a few more time if you have more questions or comments for Father Mark or for Benoit maybe, since we have a little time. It's Nathan.
So this question is for Benoit, and I'll give you a chance to get it. It's wonderful. I really look forward to using it in class, so we'll talk about that after. But I did have one question, just one. I thought it was an amazing film, but I did have a question about, there was one moment where you used the word cannibal in the film. Now I am asking, several times, and I would like that explained. Because, well, I think people in the audience may share that feeling, but I'm also trying to imagine, I could not show this film to Aboriginal people in Canada with those words in it. I couldn't do it. Even though I would really like to use it in class. So I would really like an explanation of that.
We chose this name for the member of the crew intentionally to be able to answer to this question. You know, Martinique is a land of negritude by Aimé Césaire. And decades ago, black people, African descendants from Martinique, decide to take Negro words with all its history and make it proud. And the first point is that the Amerindian people in the West Indies were practiced ritual anthropophagy. It's a historical reality. We have also now archaeological proof of bone cuts and human bone cuts and burns. And so, but for the people, it's a difficult heritage. It's a difficulty. So we decide to don't hide these things, but to confront it and to say, okay, it's a part of our history. But the question is not to say eat people is a bad thing. It's a way to be able, as an anthropologist and an archaeologist, to explain to the people in the West Indies what is ritual anthropophagy. It's not a question of feeding, it's a question of religions. And a lot of people, even in Dominica, we have some people from the Caribbean territory in Dominica were involved in our project. And we had, as you can imagine, we had a lot of discussion with them. But we decided to keep this word. And after our second point of view about that idea of cannibalism is that the Creole culture from West Indies are cannibal culture. We eat Europe, we eat Africa, we eat Americans, we eat India. And after what it appeared, it's us. It's a Creole culture. That's a cultural anthropophagy. And so we had to choose a name for the project, and we had, identity. It's a everyday change in the West Indies. And you see our flag on the board. It's a very vulgar private flag. But we had to make a choice. In Martinique, we have the French flag. We have the colonial Martinique flag of the Lord Owner of Martinique. And after, we have the independentist flag. In our boat, there was people from Guadeloupe with the same problem. People from St. Vincent, people from Dominica. So we do a stake on the side and take a pirate flag. It was more simple. And we enter in all the islands in the West Indies with this flag. Even in English Harbor in Antigua, we was the first boat arriving in English Harbor with a pirate flag in maybe 300 years. But for the cannibal things, we didn't choose to do a stake on the side. We decided to confront that, and it's a way to explain to the people what is ritual anthropology, and to explain that's not a question to a bad thing or a good thing, and explain that is a way to explain that our history, that what we teach as a children at school about good and peaceful and right, and very bad carrying, cannibalism, taking wife, and things like that, it's a colonial account. And it's a way to provoke your question, and to be able to answer and to learn to the people more about the colonial deformation, the English, of the historical reality of the native people of the West Indies. So it was a provocation. You're welcome.
Any more comments? Questions? Well, I would like to thank Father Mark and Benoit Bérin for their intervention. And I think that we will move on to the next session now.
Okay, thank you. We now call up our persons for this panel. We have our moderator, Dr. Gary Denny, and our two presenters, Dr. Melanie Newton and Dr. Judy King. Please give them a warm welcome.
Morning, everyone. We have two presenters, as you can see, and we are indeed pressed for time. So we will welcome them. They have come from very far. One is from Toronto, one is from New York. We have Dr. John, who has come from New York, Fordham University, and we have from Canada, Dr. Newton from the University of Toronto. And so we're very glad to have them here, and without wasting any more time.
Can't come down. Right, like a little more. Right, a little more. Yes, it's much better. Okay. But I was talking, but it could turn the back up because that Well, I think this is a better because it was power block and the whole thing. So you're right. Yes. Unless we care about the light in my good fun.
me say to you that I have just been offered bio of our presenters, which I have been asked to read, and I will read these bios. First, we have Dr. Julie Kim. She received a PhD from Duke University in literature and currently holds a position as assistant professor in the Department of English at Fordham University. Dr. Kim has a forthcoming book entitled States of Subsistence, Empire and Everyday Resistance in the Atlantic World, as well as an upcoming publication in Early American Studies entitled Caribs in the Atlantic World, Negotiating Empires on St. Vincent in the Age of Revolution. Dr. Kim will be presenting her paper, Multiracial Alliance and Revolution, the Black Tribes of St. Vincent, at this very session. So once again, I introduce Dr. Kim to you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, okay. And do you have the handout? Let me.
So you got to share one for 3 people. You gonna do it? Okay.
So I have a handout that I prepared, but I didn't make enough copies for everybody. So if you can just share, maybe one for every 3 people or so. But I just wanted to start. I'm going to start before you all have the handout, because the first side I'm going to read now, and then you'll be able to, by the time we get to the second side, you should have it in your hands. So what I wanted to start with was just a quote from a speech made by Joseph Chatoyer in 1795 at the beginning of the Second Carib War. And he said, "Where is the Frenchman who will not join his brothers at a moment when the voice of liberty is heard by them? Let us then unite, citizens and brothers, round the colors flying in this island, and let us hasten to cooperate to that great piece of work which has been already commenced so gloriously. But should any timorous men still exist, should any Frenchmen be held back through fear, we do hereby declare to them, in the name of the law, that those who will not be assembled with us in the course of the day shall be deemed traitors to the country and treated as enemies." Okay. "We do swear that both fire and sword shall be employed against them, that we are going to burn their estates, and that we will murder their wives and children in order to annihilate their race." So as revolutions consumed France and Haiti, the Carib leader Joseph Chatoyer made a stunning declaration. Commanding Frenchmen to hear the voice of liberty and to recognize the Caribs as citizens and brothers, Chatoyer launched a war against the British occupiers of St. Vincent on March 10, 1795. Britain formally gained control of St. Vincent in 1763 when France ceded its claim to the island at the conclusion of the 7 Years' War. In addition to having to accommodate the French settlers who had already established themselves on St. Vincent, however, the new British settlers also had to concern themselves with a 1,000-strong population of indigenous Carib inhabitants. The Caribs had lived on the island even longer than the French and could trace their ancestors in the region back to the pre-contact era. At the same time, the Caribs had proven remarkably flexible over the centuries and capable of adopting new techniques to impose imperial expansion. In the 1790s, as they heard of revolutionary conflicts around the Atlantic world, they picked up on the language of fraternity, equality, and liberty to convince the French settlers of St. Vincent to join them in overthrowing British rule. Although British commentators quickly translated Chatoyer's proclamation into English, I just read you the English translation that came out in 1795 by William Young, but the proclamation had actually originally circulated in French to appeal to its intended readers, the other French inhabitants of St. Vincent. Now, if you look at the other side of your handout, I have a copy of one of the original French proclamations. So not the side with the typing, but the other side with the image. That image is Château's declaration in French. And what's really interesting, I think, if you look at the bottom of that French copy, is there's a mark where Château signed. So he signed, you can read his name. It says Marc Ordinaire de Joseph Châteauyer. So that part is in French, but then there's also a little drawing, which was, Marc Ordinaire means the customary mark of Châteauyer. So I found this document at the National Archives in London, and it's very interesting because, to my knowledge, I haven't seen that mark of Châteauyer anywhere else. So that mark, I think, is really significant because even though the proclamation was written in French and Châteauyer was trying to appeal to the French, at the same time the mark shows that Châteauyer was also different from the French. He was Carib, and he wasn't. The Second Carib War wasn't just a French war. It was a war that was started by the Caribs, and it was on the behalf of the Caribs. It was a Carib attempt to get independence. So what I believe is according to Châteauyer, what he was saying in this declaration is that the Caribs would welcome French assistance in what he calls this great piece of work that he had already commenced so gloriously, but they would also continue to work alone if assistance did not come. Furthermore, as the proclamation reads, the Caribs would execute as traitors any French who did not choose to join them in their attack against the British. The Caribs may have been asking the French for an alliance, but they also were making clear that they depended on no one else. Recent scholarship on the Age of Revolutions and the Haitian Revolution in particular has emphasized the centrality of Caribbean actors in creating change in the Atlantic world. Yet the attention paid to the Caribbean as a site of political innovation makes the absence of the Caribs of St. Vincent from scholarly discussions all the more striking. The fact is that the St. Vincent Caribs were one of the few non-European groups to succeed in carving out an autonomous territory for themselves in the Caribbean through militarized opposition. In what follows, I will thus argue for the need to put the Caribs of St. Vincent back into discussions about anti-imperial resistance. Scholars like Laurent Dubois have spoken of the complex genealogy of revolutions in the Caribbean, and I want to suggest that we view the Caribs of St. Vincent as participants in a multiracial resistance movement that grew out of imperial rivalries in the Caribbean. And now before I continue with my argument, I just want to note that I am calling the indigenous groups who lived on St. Vincent in this paper Caribs, as opposed to Garifuna, because I'm looking at their 17th and 18th century history, and Carib is the term that appears the most in the historical documentation. More importantly, though, I want to emphasize the linkages between indigenous groups, between the indigenous peoples of St. Vincent and the indigenous peoples in other parts of the Lesser Antilles and the Caribbean. I mean, as we saw in Benoit, his wonderful film. These other groups who are also known by the name of Carib. It's going off of what Benoit also said about cannibals. It's interesting that there's evidence that even in the 18th century, the term Carib had already been adopted by some native groups as a term of pride. It was a word that could obviously had colonialist connotations, but some native groups, it seems, also took the word to be a symbol of their ability to resist and to fight back against colonialism. I'm also using Carib because I want to start by talking a little bit about the history of the term Black Carib, which is the term that the British started using to what the British started naming the Garifuna, and which is a term that still appears in a lot of the scholarly literature. Now, on the other hand, though, many anthropologists have now recognized that the term Black Carib is very problematic. For one, it really doesn't appear in the historical documentation until the late 18th century, precisely when British efforts to colonize the island intensified. Second, once we read the colonial reports, we can see that Black Carib was used most frequently. The term was used most frequently in the context of plans to to appropriate or take Carib territories. So for instance, William Young in 1795 wrote a work called An Account of the Black Caribs, which was this plea to metropolitan authorities in London, trying to convince them of the need to exterminate the Carib participants in the Second Carib War. This account further shows how the Black Carib category could be utilized in arguments for colonization by telling a biased and semi-mythological history of their origins. As Young's story goes, and as the British story goes, groups of yellow or red Caribs, whom they considered the true indigenous inhabitants of St. Vincent, lived alone on the island